Thank you for that. I think the good news is I'll try and keep this talk relatively short to catch us up on some time and hopefully leave a bit of time for some questions. I guess the main theme is simply covering the issue of organic certification, if that's something that you're considering for either your own farm or for your supply chain. And I think if there's one key message I'd like you to take out of the presentation is that the certification aspect for organic production is the easy bit. It's the simple, straightforward bit. It can be complex if you make it that way, but our team makes that process, I'd like to think, relatively simple these days. The real issue you have to weigh up is the one, other than the production issues at farm level, is whether or not this is a production system and a marketing system for you. And we as an organisation, as an industry organisation, don't get up and spruik the boundless opportunities in this space. It's clearly a niche market. It's a very successful and growing niche market I'm sure you've heard of. But the last thing we would want to ever do is over-talk up the opportunities in that space. There clearly are opportunities. There are clearly gaps in the marketplace. But the biggest challenge you've got as producers or supply chain vendors is to scrutinise the marketplace itself very carefully, talk to those who have been there, done that already. And there's a number of those people milling around, I think, at this event today, and then work out whether that is for you. So I can't emphasise enough, too often we hear people saying, oh, I hear there's an undersupply in organic, I'm going to get into that because I'm having troubles marketing my tomatoes or whatever they might be. We'd say that's the last thing you want to do, is to get into our industry with that mindset. You've got to do a lot of research. We produce a market report every couple of years for that very purpose. That's free online on our website you can look at. And I can't emphasise enough, please do talk to those in the supply chain who have been there, done that. So with that in mind, and I'm happy to take any specific questions around that once I've delivered this little talk, is that I'll just walk you through some of the mechanics of certification as well as what our team offer in that services space. So just to clarify too, Australian, often people confuse what's going on between the two structures of our group or the two segments of our group. Australian Organic is the member-owned industry organisation. It's a not-for-profit group. It turns 30 next year, so it's been around for some time, servicing the industry with things like commissioning research on the marketplace and servicing members' interests for information, networking, etc. We then have a wholly owned subsidiary under that not-for-profit structure that certifies the vast majority of label end users in the certification space for organic, and that's called Australian Certified Organic. So you'd obviously go into the marketplace. I'm sure you've seen in the trade room back in the other section of this building that logo you will find on the organic products that are being presented in that forum there. So that's what our subsidiary does, and it's the subsidiary activities that I'll now reflect on or focus on. I won't step you through each of those dot points. You can read that. Essentially, I know it sounds really a bit silly to almost point it out, but in some ways the beginning of that certification process is simply about submitting the documents, filling in the application document and getting into the office. Too often we hear people saying, oh yeah, I was thinking about doing that and I'm now ready to do it, and I want to market next month. There's a time period required for organic certification, and that time period involves getting documents in to get reviewed. It's simply looking at the history of your farming activity if you're at a farm level. If it's a processor, it's looking at your QA and related systems in place. Most processors, all processors these days in the hort space have HACCP-based QA systems already in place, and if you've got that, you're essentially almost there in terms of the main documents required anyway. The rest is simply about segmentation in time or space, as they say, in the handling of organic versus non-organic products. So you've got to get those documents in, get them reviewed, and get an auditor allocated to come out to your farm. Because there is a time delay to eventually get full certification, the absolute minimum time delay is a 12-month period from when you have that first audit. So the auditor coming out, conducting the audit on your farm, they're cross-checking what you've said you've done on farm with what your records are saying. They'll then submit that report, that'll get reviewed. That begins that 12-month period right there. So I can't emphasise enough in this space, get documents in and think later about backfilling some of the issues around it. You can talk to people in our office any time. Our CEO of the group, Paul Stadhams, is over there trying to hide behind that big projector, but when he stands up, he's 6.5 foot tall, so he's easy not to miss. Paul's team, there'll be quite a few of them actually, I think, Paul, at the dinner tomorrow night. Is that right? Yep. So if you're around for the dinner tomorrow night, feel free to, for free, pick their brains about any of this sort of stuff. But there's one particular woman, Callie Lewis, in our office. If you rang our head office, you can talk to her and she'll walk you through any of the questions you've got around this documentation process. Time frame and costs involved, as I said before, there's that critical issue of the first year if you're a farmer, irrespective of what you've been doing at farm level. There is that process that you've got to go through. You've possibly heard this golden rule of 3 years as well. So I've heard some people say, oh, look, I've looked at that, but 3 years would just kill me. I can't wait 3 years before I sell my product organically. In actual fact, that's 3 years since the last use of a so-called prohibited input. In other words, any of the inputs, fertilisers or pesticides that are listed as prohibited in the organic standard. It's 3 years since you last used that on the given part of land that you are applying for certification for. So you can see that you don't have to be under the inspection system for that whole 3 years. You have to have documented evidence that you haven't used such inputs in those areas. Those areas get tested, but you don't have to actually have a full 3 years before you get certified on that. You've got to have documented evidence of that, if that makes sense. I'm happy to take questions on that later, but that's often one that people misunderstand. You can get into the system within 12 months at what's called in-conversion to organic certification. And if you do, or if you're lucky enough to have history on certain portions of the farm that have that history longer than 1 year and actually add up to 3, you can achieve certified organic after that time frame. Oh, sorry, and in terms of cost too, we hear all sorts of inordinate numbers thrown around, people saying, oh, I've also looked at that certification, it's outrageously expensive. I've heard $20,000 sometimes said, etc. The base entry point with our group is around, I don't know what we're saying here, but I often say to people between $1,200 to $1,500 at a base level. And then when you start to sell organic, we have a so-called industry development levy that kicks in and it caps out for the larger growers at $4,000. So you're basically looking at somewhere between $5,000 to $5,500 at the very large grower level to maintain certification year on year. In those first years when you're just converting through, it's simply the cost of the audits there. So, you know, roughly $1,100, $1,200 would cover that. What can you then expect from that, and why would you even get certified? I guess I should have asked that question at the start. There's no legislation protecting the word organic in Australia, and there's likely not to be any time soon. The ACCC has been very actively involved, having said that, with our industry in establishing a base standard that we work to, and to the credit of the major retailers, you can't trade with them unless you have a certificate for organic via an accredited certifier that's accredited under the government program for that national standard. So that's where our group comes in. We've been doing that, as I said before, for almost 30 years now. And to the credit of the main retail trade here in Australia, even though it's not law, probably similar to, I guess, the food safety requirements, they say you have to have that ticket to trade to actually sell into us. You have to legally, on top of that, definitely have such a ticket if you want to export the product. And that's a whole other kettle of fish, I guess, again, in terms of knowing additional importing country requirements. And we'd say definitely do additional research there if you're thinking that you're at a scale you also want to export. So our group is accredited by the government to approve those exports. The so-called organic produce certificates, they're called, which are the legal document you're required to export any organic product out of the country. I think, Paul, the last count was last month was up to 500 certificates in that month alone that we actually signed off. That's across every category, not just horticulture. But that's grown, I think, from this time last year, Paul, was 300. Am I right with that too? So it's quite significantly jumping in that whole space, and there's definitely opportunities in that export space. So to recap, I guess you're getting the ticket to trade. More importantly, we're saying you're getting a logo you can put on your product that increasingly our consumers are recognising as generally a logo for organic, but more importantly are recognising it as a mark of integrity. Probably one other thing I'll just flag there is the reference down the bottom to this Organic Awareness Month. It's coming around in September again this year. I noticed there's a few members who would already know about that. If you're interested in that space, again, talk to Paul and his team through the next 24 hours. I think I pretty much covered the main bits of that. We're sort of, as an industry group, we are continuing to work on expanding the awareness of the mark itself. more importantly, we work a lot behind the scenes with the major retailers and other supply chain players to ensure, A, that people are aware of the regulatory requirements, the related QA requirements, and any changes that are often ongoing in the industry itself. As I said before, Paul is bringing a number of people to the dinner tomorrow night, so they'll be milling around for the awards dinner. So watch out for that table space. And I think I'll leave it at that, unless there's any questions. Thank you.